Hey everyone, my name is Dyess Harp, and I'm an undergraduate student that's working with Dr. Escobar on the Vampire Bat Project here in Columbia. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about bat venipuncture. So what is bat venipuncture? Well, it's when you're puncturing a vein in order to withdraw a blood sample from the bats. So why might we draw blood? Well, bats are really important because they're an animal that has a lot of spillover from zoonotic viruses. And so by drawing their blood, we can look at stuff like antibody detection to see if they have encountered a specific virus or pathogen, or if they're even carrying it still. If the pathogens are in the blood, we could analyze the pathogens and study them. We can also look at immunology, so specifically with white nose syndrome, which is a fungus that is affecting a lot of American bats. You can look at their blood to see how they're doing against white nose syndrome. And they've been doing some research into looking at the bats that are surviving white nose syndrome and the ones that aren't. You can also track genetic mutations, so you can use this blood for other projects that aren't just related to, pathogens. You can see the adaptations of different environments. You can measure like oxygen content to see the elevations where bats live. There's a lot of really cool stuff that this can be used for. You can also look at the nutrient consumption. So you could do, for instance, stable isotope analysis and analyze their blood to see what they're eating. With that, you can actually get very good approximations of what they're eating by analyzing their different levels of specific stable isotopes. So we've talked about why it's really important to draw blood from bats and all the great things that we can get from it. But bats are very different. They're the most diverse species of mammal in the world. There's many different kinds, all the way from, very small bats like the little brown bat in North America to the giant bats like the flying foxes in Asia and Australia. So you kind of have to examine how you're going to draw blood from each of those bats. So it can be very different because, for instance, with a flying fox, a lot of times you can just directly, pull blood out from one of their veins, but with a smaller bat, you can't do that. So before you even get to the stage that you're collecting blood, you need to analyze what kind of bat am I working with, and how would the bat respond to specific blood draw methods. Let's talk about now how to draw blood. So you can use a couple different methods here. You could do a straight cardiac puncture, which, if you're not really worried about the survivability of your animal, would probably get you a lot of blood. You can do an orbital sinus, but it's known to cause a lot of irritation to the bats and can decrease survivability. You can do a brachial vein, a jugular vein, or the cranial vena cava, but specifically what most papers recommend is the cephalic vein or the saphenous vein. You can see the right saphenous vein on this picture right here. And those are chosen specifically because they are non-lethal, and you tend to get a good amount of blood out of them. One of the great things you can do if you want to increase blood flow, and we'll talk a little bit about it on the next slide, is to actually warm pack it. So you warm up the bat's arm a little bit and allow blood to flow in. So moving on, we're talking more about, what you should do if you're attempting to draw blood from a bat. So I talked about warm packing it. That is a great idea if you're worried about blood flow. I think another thing that you should be doing is you should be applying antiseptic methods before you put the puncture on. You don't want to, cut into a bat's vein to try to extract blood and it be dirty because of any number of things, especially if you caught them through a mist net. You're going to then want to puncture the wound to begin bleeding. And this can be done in a couple of different ways. One of the ways is you can just take a syringe and poke it, and you, depending on the size of the bat, you could apply some negative pressure and just draw blood that way. Another thing that you could do is you could take, for instance, like a scalpel and cut open a vein just a little bit and allow some blood to flow through. You need to be careful though, because bats' wing membranes are very thin though, and you don't want to cut through it. So if it's a larger bat, you can use that syringe, but in the smaller bats where you need to, poke a hole in a vein to get blood to start flowing, you can use capillary tubes. So you can put the capillary tube right on where you made the puncture, and it will suck up the blood without you having to do anything else for it. After that, you're going to want to apply a cotton ball, and this should be applied because bats' blood is only 10% of their body weight. They don't have a significant amount of blood, and you don't want them to lose it. Now, they will clot very easily, which is one of the things that you have to worry about. But that should mean that it should clot up pretty quickly. You don't have to leave the cotton ball on for a long time, but a couple of minutes and kind of just until the blood stops. Another thing you should be watching out for is after you've done all this, you need to monitor the bat to ensure that it's okay. The bleeding hasn't continued, maybe the clot got loose or something like that, and that substantial blood loss has not occurred. Because if it has, you might see certain warning signs. For instance, like the bat's not opening its eye, it's not responding. And this can depend on the different kinds of restraint that you're using. Another quick thing to keep in mind before we move on is that a good amount of blood for you to take from a bat tends to be 1% of its total body weight. That's a safe amount. Any more is usually not recommended, and if you go lower than that, you might not get as much blood as you need. So, what to look out for? You want to make sure that your bat is properly restrained the whole time. And that's not only because it helps you safely extract blood from them, but it also helps prevent the bat from hurting itself. Specifically with, depending on the way that you are extracting blood from the bat, you might consider having an additional person there. That can be really helpful because you can have one person hold the other side of the bat's body or its head, and then you can hold the wing depending on whether you're right or left-handed, will depend on the wing that you get, and kind of stretch it out and, do venipuncture. Another thing to consider is, especially if it's like a larger bat, if you might need chemical restraint, sometimes it might be too hard for you to hold down a bat, and its struggling could cause you to hurt it more than just a quick venipuncture. You also want to make sure that you're keeping the bat within its necessary temperature range. So like we talked about earlier, there's a lot of different bat species all over the world with very varying sizes. And so when you're doing that research on your specific species to kind of see how you're going to extract blood from them and so on, you should also be looking at what's a good temperature range for them to stay in, because you don't, especially if they're under, chemical restraint or stress, you don't want them dropping below or going above that. So here's some of my sources for you to look over. The paper from 2010, Escher D. and Weinberg M. Venipuncture in Bats is a great resource to look at. You can also check out these other papers listed here. They will give you different ideas of venipuncture depending on the bat species. Lastly, we have questions. If you have any questions, anything that you would like to discuss with me, please feel free to reach out to Dr. Escobar and he'll put you in touch with me. Thank you so much for listening.